Hello learner, I'm glad again to have you on board for another session. Welcome to the Manifested Publishers e-learning platform. In this lesson, we'll continue with our discussion on the topic nature of communication. And just to have a recap of our previous lesson, we did introduce communication and we defined communication. We considered the elements and process of communication as well as the objectives of communication. In this lesson, we'll continue with that discussion by looking at effective communication, the principles of effective communication, and the factors that are likely going to impair the effectiveness of any communication, better known as the barriers to effective communication. An organization must always endeavor to communicate effectively in order to derive the benefits of effective communication. And we will therefore define effective communication as communication which is understood in the manner it was intended. For an organization to achieve effective communication, it needs to always observe the essentials of effective communication. Effective communication can be achieved by observing the essentials of effective communication. Better known as the principles of effective communication, or 7 C's. The 7 C's. Now, these 7 C's, or the principles of effective communication, are guidelines, principles of effective communication, which we are calling the 7 C's. When developing any form of communication or while engaged in any communication activity, the compliance of these principles will lead to effective communication, regardless of whether the communication is written, oral, or visual. So that the principles are guidelines that when followed in all forms of communication, will lead to communication being effective. I have mentioned that the principles apply to all forms of communication, whether you're writing a letter, whether you're making a telephonic conversation, whether you're making a speech or delivering an oral presentation, whether you're developing an advertisement. Complying with the 7 C's is likely going to lead to effective communication. Communication being understood the way in which the sender intended. The 7 principles of effective communication includes clarity, conciseness, concreteness, completeness, courtesy, consideration, and correctness. What do they mean? For any piece of communication to be effective, it needs to be clear. And what clarity means is that the language, the words used in the communication process needs to be simple to understand. Clarity is about wordiness. It's about emphasizing on a specific message or goal at a time, and not trying to achieve too much at once. If you're addressing an idea, stick to that idea. Take it through to the end before you can move on to another idea. So it's all about emphasizing on a specific message or goal at a time, and not trying to achieve a lot at the same time. Now, clarity in communication is going to be achieved through complete clarity of thoughts and ideas. 2, it will also be achieved through use of exact, appropriate, and the messages are words that are not ambiguous. Conciseness is all about being brief and straight to the point. Conciseness is about wordiness, trying to express what you're communicating or passing across in the least possible words So it requires that you do not have long sentences. Conciseness requires that you don't keep repeating yourself, if it is in speech, if it is in writing. And it requires that one is precise, just using fewest words possible to pass the message. The third principle is concreteness, and concreteness strengthens clarity. Concreteness means that a message needs to be specific rather than fuzzy and general. There are words, but not too many. There should, whatever it is that you're saying or communicated, needs to be supported by clear and vivid facts. A message is concrete if it is glued together. It is substantiated by way of facts and by way of figures, if need be. Completeness, which is the fourth principle, requires that a message must contain all essentials. Sometimes leaving out certain details, while those details are known to the source of the message, they are not known to the recipient. And the recipient may need those details to enable them understand the message better. So messages again should be supported by additional information. If it is in business, you're trying to express the performance of an organization, provide reports, the financial reports like the balance sheet, the profit and loss accounts. That way, the communication will be complete. A person will have all the detail they need to properly understand the message. Principle number 5 is courtesy. Courtesy requires that messages show respect. It means that messages should not be offensive in any way. The tone of communication, writing has a tone, oral communication has a tone, visual communication has a tone. The tone of the message should not be harsh. It needs to be friendly. A sender of a message needs to show the receiver's expression, should be reflective, judicious, and enthusiastic when developing a message, so that it's not obscene, it doesn't hurt the feelings of the other party. Number 6 is consideration. And consideration means stepping into the shoes of the other party, putting yourself in their shoes. What that means is that the sender of a message must always consider, take into account the other party, their viewpoints, their literacy level, their education level, their status in society, their age, their gender, among other characteristics. For you to be on the same wavelength, the message should be designed so that whatever it is that is meant for the recipient, you as you generate it, you put yourself in the recipient's position, so that if it were you, would you be in a position to understand the message as delivered, right? Would it be appropriate for you if you are the receiver in this case? So it is all about taking into account the receiver's standpoint and their abilities. The last one is correctness, which simply means accuracy, so that messages need to be accurate. They should have no errors, neither should they have or show any bias. Errors in terms of pronunciation, errors will relate to spelling, errors will relate to statement of figures, and errors will relate to punctuation and sentence construction, so that the developer of any message must ensure that they carefully do so in order not to leave out some detail, omit important details which will compromise on the accuracy of the message. So we're simply saying by observing these principles, there are good chances that an organization is likely going to develop effective communication. Now, however, with the principles of effective communication notwithstanding, communication is never effective. And the reason for that is because there exist barriers to effective communication. And the barriers to effective communication are factors that interfere with communication processes, making them ineffective. So while an organization tries to communicate effectively, there are certain barriers that will exist which will compromise on the effectiveness of any communication. These factors will emanate from within the organization and also from outside of the organization. And the presence of any of these factors is likely going to impair the quality or to impair, yes, the quality of the communication, leading to ineffective communication. Now, what are some of these barriers? The barriers are many. Semantics. We'll have information overload. Time pressures. Complex organization structures. Status differences or authority differences. Distraction. E.g. noise. Distortion. Filtration. Wrong choice of medium. Poor retention. Bias. Barriers are many. There is also emotions, number 12. There is also abstraction, slanting, etc. Now, what do these barriers represent? Semantics is a branch of English concerned with the meaning of words. And in as much as culture is shared, there are differences when it comes to the meaning of words in different cultures. So semantics is a barrier of communication, or barrier to communication, which arises as a result of differences in interpretation of meaning of words. So that people of different cultures will have different meanings for the same word, which breaks or leads to a misunderstanding between those parties. For one person who has a different cultural background, a word means one thing, and to the other person, the word means another thing altogether. If those people are engaged in communication, there will automatically be a misunderstanding. Information overload. Sometimes in organizations, employees are provided with too much information at once, making it very hard for them to process it fully. In the process, they will end up either overlooking some of the information and not acting on it, or even forgetting altogether. The third barrier is time pressures. Organizational tasks have timelines during which they need to be executed. People are required to complete work, assignments within a given time. Now, because of the time constraints, employees are always in a rush to try and beat deadlines. And while doing that, they can be tempted to take shortcuts in the communication process. And every time an employee decides to take a shortcut, then some people are going to be left out in the dark, and the communication will have failed. Complex organization structures. The formal communication channel in an organization is defined in the organization chart. The organization chart depicts the channels or lines of communication in an organization. If an organization has so many hierarchical levels or levels of management, this makes the chain of communication very long. It makes the employees not properly understand from whom they are supposed to receive communication, neither do they understand whom they are supposed to provide information, because the channel of communication is not clear, because the organization structure again is having so many hierarchical levels, making it hard for employees to know the right channel to follow. Status and authority differences. This is superior-junior relationships. In organizations, people have or sit in or have different statuses in terms of power, authority, and responsibility. Now, organizational rules impose certain regulations in interactions between these people. Now, that somehow creates a barrier so that there is no much freedom between positions of different status, so that sometimes subordinates may find it hard to express themselves to their superiors because of that difference in status and authority. Distraction. Distraction takes many forms. It may be physical, it might be mental, it might be emotional. If there is noise at the background and somebody is trying to deliver a speech, the audience will not hear them clearly. Or in an office, you're trying to communicate and they are ringing telephones all over, the other party may not hear you properly. Emotional noise. Sometimes, owing to sickness, bad moods, a person's emotions makes it hard for this person to communicate effectively. There is noise from within them, inside them, that prevents them from following what is being communicated. Distortion is possible change of messages, possible modification of messages, deliberately, right? It's either because the chain of communication is too long, so that as a message passes every stage of processing, it continues to lose its meaning, continues to change its meaning. Some words are edited. Before it gets to the final recipient, it has completely changed its form and the meaning. Filtration is deliberately editing messages. This is mostly done by superiors in upward communication, so that the managers or superiors want to change and design a message in a way that is favorable to them, in a way that suits them. Again, wrong choice of medium. Different messages will require different mediums which are going to carry or relay them appropriately. Now, if a wrong choice of medium is made, then the communication process is going to be impaired. Using a practical example, a youngster cannot decide to say hi to their grandmother who never went to school using WhatsApp, because the grandfather or grandmother may not even have the WhatsApp application or a phone with the WhatsApp application? How will they retrieve it? Next is poor retention. The human memory is limited, and there is a capacity that it can accommodate. If one is given too much details, chances are those messages will be beyond their capacity, and they will not recall some of the details that were provided in a communication. Bias. Bias is being selective in what one wants to hear, so that for appropriate messages or messages that one consider appropriate, they are willing to listen. But messages that go against their philosophy and their desires, they are disregarded. Barrier number 12 is emotions. This is one of the distractions. Emotions are the mental or one's mental state of mind, so that you're either sad, you're either too excited, you're in a state of sorrow. All these ones will distract a party to a communication process, because their mind is all focused on the emotions that they are experiencing, making it hard for them to follow what is being said. Abstraction is all about summarizing, and it is about leaving out some details. While it is normal to summarize messages, when one chooses to focus on some detail and omit others, that is, chooses to keep only to the essentials, then they might lose a lot of meaning in those details that they have omitted. Slanting is an extreme form of abstracting, where a message is too much summarized. It means omitting too much detail, which changes the context of the message, ending up in a bias-oriented message. It is all about giving a particular bias or slant to the reality. And the effect is that the message that you will end up delivering is somewhat twisted or does not represent the initial intended message. So these are some of the barriers that will compromise on the quality of communication, making it ineffective. Now, so how then do organizations ensure that they improve or enhance the quality of their communication? How are enhancing the effectiveness, of organizational communication, Because an organization does not want to lose out on the benefits of effective communication, it must try as much as possible to neutralize these barriers. While observing the principles of communication, these barriers should also be identified and reversed. So the ways or methods of enhancing the effectiveness of communication in an organization are going to be derived from the barriers, so that you only need to identify a barrier and reverse it. So we are saying semantics is a common problem in communication, or barrier to communication. And we said semantics is the barriers that arises from the difference in meanings in language, or meanings in language. How do we deal with that? Organizations should always emphasize and train their employees on the need to use common and simple language. So, one, use of simple language. So that an organization needs to have a communication policy right? Requiring that employees use simple and language that is common to all organizational members. Information overload. Don't give too much information to employees, orders and instructions at the same time. So avoiding information overload. Managers need to prioritize work. Prioritize work so that they are not demanding too much of subordinates at once. Time pressures. There should be flexibility in meeting targets. 3. Flexibility in meeting targets. In meeting targets. Targets should not be very rigid, because if they are rigid, employees will have no option but rather to take shortcuts in order to complete their work at the right time. Complex organization structures would be reversed by ensuring that an organization opts for a simple organization structure that doesn't have so many hierarchical levels. One that has very clear reporting relationship. One can tell who is the immediate boss and can tell who is the immediate junior. Status and authority difference. The fact that employees are not free to address their bosses because of the differences in status is going to be solved by that is democratic managerial styles. Styles that provide freedom and room for employees to express themselves to their bosses. Open door policy, for example, so that an employee can address their boss anytime without the need to follow so many formalities like booking appointments. Distraction is another problem, particularly noise. So elimination or reduction of noise. The sources of noise needs to be identified and eliminated, removed altogether, even if it means having a soundproof working environment, because maybe there is a source of noise from outside that the organization does not have control over. Then it should ensure that that noise is not allowed to access or penetrate the organizational premises. Wrong choice of medium. 7. Correct. Ensuring that at all times correct mediums are used. Correct choice of medium, depending on the needs of each message in terms of detail, in terms of complexity. An appropriate medium should always be selected to ensure that it effectively conveys the intended message. Again, that is giving constructive feedback. 8. Giving constructive feedback. Feedback is important in communication. Every time somebody initiates communication and they do not get any feedback, particularly subordinates will address their bosses on certain issues. If the bosses never get back to them, then subordinates will be discouraged to communicate in future, because after all their efforts will be in futility. Nobody acts or reacts to employee concerns, so they will have no business in initiating communication in future. Again, employee training. 9. Training employees on basic communication skills. on basic communication skills. Now, people need to practice effective or active listening. People need to be trained on how they can practice active listening. People need to be trained how to write basic correspondence, good letters, draft good memos, develop good circulars. People need to be trained on how to deliver effective speeches. People need to be trained on courtesy and the protocol to be followed in communication processes so that they do not violate some or most of these rules that are beneficial in achieving effective communication. So on this note, this brings us to the end of this lesson. Thank you. I will see you in our next lesson.
Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to get yourself a copy of our professionally prepared study text and revision partners. Visit our shop along Tom Boyer Street, Pioneer House, 3rd floor, opposite Fire Station.